Hey there, Mr. Terry, high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. All right, I've been reminded that it's been too long since I covered a simple history video. Now, this video came out a couple weeks ago and it's doing well, and this topic is very fun to look at. It's called The Hardest Countries to Invade. All right, I'm going to give my thoughts along the way. I want you to give your thoughts down in the comment section. I also want to make sure you are checking out the original video. It will be linked down below. Please support Simple History. And come on back, give a thumbs up if you liked this video. All right, here we go. Now, I don't know how many they're going to put in here, but I definitely want to see the United States, and I want to see Russia.
On the planet to invade. I'm sure that you all know military operations are hard to plan. Even the slightest oversight can lead to disaster, and there's a lot of factors to consider.
Yep.
Everything from distances, supply lines, terrain, weather conditions, and even civilian populations all have to be taken into account. No nation is impossible to invade, but there are some that are much more of a headache than others.
That's
the United States.
Yep. Now, here are my prefaced reasons. One is geography. United States is vast. It has two land borders there that have a lot of, and I guess you could debate, depending on your beliefs or whatever, the security of those borders. But nevertheless, we only have a couple shared borders there. Vast country. We have a gun population on top of having the largest and most well-paid army in the world, but we do have a civilian population with millions and millions of guns around. So that's an army you'd have to deal with, even past the biggest army in the world. So those are a couple of the obvious, right? Let's see what they say.
Today, the United States possesses the most powerful military in the world, with defense spending outstripping the next 10 nations combined. Of the 47 aircraft carriers and helicopter carriers used worldwide, 20 belong to the U.S. Navy, with their closest rival floating 5. And when divided by branch of service, it has the 1st, 2nd, 4th, and 7th largest air forces in the world.
All combined. Now, aircraft carriers are especially going to be useful offensively, but you can put it in port cities again. A place like, I mean, you're going to have your West Coast, but a place like Pearl Harbor, it's going to be a lot better defended this time, but having somewhere outstretched because it's an extension that you can be able to land and take off of course. But yes, and then, all of us basically live in this. Look at this scene right here. Everyone's got their dog. Dog wants to play, but he's being ignored by dog dad here. Too busy being drunk and has his rifle out on the porch as mom is catching some rays with her assault rifle. And then while little daughter is running full speed, chasing down somebody with her handgun. If you're not from the United States, this is a perfect depiction of what you're going to see when you go and walk your neighborhood.
In light of this, any attempt to invade
wait, what? Who's this guy? What? Some freak chasing down the girl, or are they both chasing down somebody who looked at him wrong?
United States is unlikely in the extreme. Even without such a powerful military, launching an invasion would not be an easy proposition. Perhaps the greatest defense the United States has to protect itself from being invaded is its location. The nation is bordered on the east and west by thousands of miles of open ocean. Any rival nation or power block that could feasibly threaten the U.S. would have the monumental logistical task of supplying a force sufficient enough to subdue the third largest nation across endless miles of trackless water.
Now, the only hypothesis I've heard about this taking over the United States was in Man in the High Castle, and that was because the Germans were able to develop atomic weapons before the United States. But other than that, I don't know what alternate reality you would go with here to think of something plausible like this.
Even the isolated state of Hawaii is a tiny dot in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles from any mainland, and supplying an invasion force would be a titanic undertaking for such a small territory. Should the logistics challenge be overcome, the topography of the U.S. would make any invasion difficult at best. The largest state of Alaska is gigantic, at over 663,000.
Let's be honest. If someone wants to invade the United States, I don't know if they're going to Alaska. I mean, maybe you're going up there if you're like Russia because you like the oil, but I mean, that's about it. You're not going to Russia to use that as some kind of stepping stone to go past Canada to the continental United States. But I guess if anything, if you were to invade somebody like in the United States, Alaska, I guess might be the way to go, but I don't know.
square miles, most of it lacking any real infrastructure or population centers, and covered in forests and mountain ranges that are difficult to traverse, and can experience winters with temperatures dropping well below freezing during the winter. The lower 48 states have their own geographic challenges as well. Covering over 3 million square miles of territory, the size alone is a daunting task for any army. The Pacific Northwest is covered in dense forests that are difficult to navigate, while the Southwest is home to scorching deserts where temperatures can reach 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Separating the West Coast from the interior is the rugged Rocky Mountains, whose narrow passes are perfect choke points to stall an invader.
I mean, say what you want to say about our infrastructure, but we got freeways, we got roads. You can get through all that stuff pretty quick. I don't think the geography is going to be as, like the climate, like they're talking about, is going to be as big of a deal than just the vastness of the United States.
The Great Plains are vast expanses of wide open territory subject to severe weather.
Shout out to Fred Chris vlogging through history. He's gonna look like that once he goes white hair, and we'll call him that. Colonel I don't know, what would be a good name, good KFC like name, Colonel Sanders.
Conditions, mainly in the form of tornadoes, suffering more than the rest of the world combined.
We do shoot our tornadoes with guns.
The southeast is filled with swamps and marshland that can bog down any
nobody's
invader,
invading down there. There's nothing good down there.
is shielded by the Appalachian Mountain Range, which are not as rugged as the Rockies, but are still a formidable barrier, and filled with countless caves and mines that could house hidden insurgents. The Northeast is heavily urbanized, turning the sprawling metropolitan areas into so many Stalingrads that grind down an invader. In addition to the geography, the population itself is a defense.
Yep, literally. I mean, my friends, my non-American friends here, did you not know this is what it is? You will see it, a guy, somebody with an RPG. That is going to happen. We do have AKs. We import, Russian guns as well. And yeah, all our dogs have 9mm.
30 million people, the United States is the third most populated nation on the planet and is by far the most heavily armed.
And I will tell you, and I'm pausing a lot here, I just want to make it very clear to our non-United States folks, we have people that have been fantasizing, about having to protect their country from some kind of threat, whether it's foreign or domestic. There are people that are thinking about this. They have plans about how to turn their houses basically into these forts. They're fantasizing about it. They're foaming at the mouth. They're just hoping for a chance to be able to do this stuff. This is what American dreams are made of.
With an estimated 120 guns for every 100 citizens, there are an estimated 400 million firearms and more trillions of rounds of ammunition in private hands. Should even a fraction of these people fight in an invasion scenario, they would still overwhelm any possible invader with the sheer weight of numbers. All of these factors combined mean that a direct invasion of the United States is almost certain to fail, even if the overwhelming might of the U.S. military is not brought to bear. Switzerland.
Dropping guns as they go. Yeah, okay. I like this.
Today,
my grandfather passed away just a while ago, and he was from Switzerland and was during World War II. And you have to serve the military when you're in Switzerland, and he was at age where Switzerland was a country actively fighting in the war. He would have gone there. But anyway, I used to ask him stuff about history, of course, and I said, hey, why didn't the Germans ever invade through you guys? Now, he didn't really ever say the stuff about how, Germany and Switzerland were economic partners, there were sympathizers there and all that stuff. What he went with, and it makes sense because you're Swiss, you don't want it, you want your country to sound strong, was that he said Mustache Man in Germany would have lost 1 million people in an invasion of Switzerland. And I don't know if that's hyperbolic there, but we'll see what they say, and I'll chime in with other things he might have said that is not covered here.
Small Central European nation of Switzerland.
They do fisticuffs.
Best known for its perpetual neutrality. It has held this policy for over 500 years and was confirmed in 1815 with the Congress of Vienna, which ended the Napoleonic Wars.
Yep.
After sitting on the sidelines while nations fought bitterly around them, Switzerland.
By the way, how do you guys view Switzerland? I figure it's the people that are like, oh, they're neutral cowards. Then people are like, no, they're freaking based. They sit back and just let everyone else fight. And if we're not being messed with, they don't care. What's your take on Switzerland?
Is better known for its chocolate and ski resorts than military prowess. Any potential invader, however, should keep in mind that the seemingly placid attitude towards international affairs belies a very different reality. Geographically, Switzerland is in the middle of the Alps mountain range, a geographic feature that is, at best, difficult to traverse, even with modern military equipment. Avalanches and landslides are a constant danger and are capable of stopping any invading army in its tracks.
We've seen that, those avalanches, you know, especially like in World War One. You heard about those with like the Italians fighting the Austrians, and yeah, a lot of soldiers died from avalanches. Think of all the bombing and all of the ruckus and commotion that comes with war. Vehicles bombing, all that stuff. It's like, no wonder. I mean, it's going to trigger those avalanches.
Much like Hannibal crossing the Alps to attack Rome, any invading army would be forced to negotiate narrow mountain passes, where one wrong move could send the hapless victim plummeting to their death. Any advance would have to be slow, cautious, and methodical, meaning that speed and mobility would be greatly hampered. These narrow passes, as well as tunnels and other passages through the mountains, create perfect choke points.
Yep. So they have these all over. They still exist. Basically, every entrance into Switzerland has some kind of military fortification of some kind, where it's there's, you know, like this, there could be nests. They could easily rig explosives. And I know in times of war around Switzerland, they used to do that because like a lot of the entrances into the heart of Switzerland are bridges, and they would set up demolitions that basically at a moment's notice, they can push the detonator and completely lock out Switzerland and cut off all the access points there. But yeah, they have these tunnels, these gun nests that can aim right there. But yeah, the tunnels are all over. It's pretty cool. Look at them. They still have them today. They're still active and they're cool. They're hidden. Really, really kind of neat to look at.
Any advantage in numbers would be negated, with the Swiss able to hold off large numbers of enemies with minimal forces. While they are politically neutral in global affairs, it is very much an armed neutrality. Since 1880, Switzerland has created a large and complex series of defenses capable of repelling any foreign invasion. Using the rugged alpine terrain to their advantage, the National Redoubt, as it was known, turned the seemingly tranquil nation into a virtually impregnable fortress. The exact makeup of this defense system has changed over the years, being constantly upgraded based on technological advancements, changes in military doctrine, and potential geopolitical threats. The Redoubt consists of over 8,000 hidden bunkers and storage depots, often situated at strategic mountain passes, turning already...
It kind of sounds like the whole country has their own, like, Maginot Line.
Difficult to traverse terrain into a chain of citadels that would have to be laboriously cleared one at a time. During the Second World War, over fears of a German invasion, over 2,000 tunnels, bridges, and other points of infrastructure were rigged with explosives, set to detonate to stop any advance. During the Cold War, many of these structures were still set with explosives, and even into the 21st century, many bridges connecting to the outside world were prepared for detonation, cutting off Switzerland from any hostile neighbors. There has been a push to deactivate them in recent years, but should the geopolitical climate change, they can be rewired as necessary. In response to potential nuclear fallout during the Cold War, Switzerland enacted a shelters for all policy. Since 1963, any new homes or apartment complexes must either have a fallout shelter dug underneath it, or the owner of the building must pay for the use of a public shelter.
Isn't that crazy? Everyone's got their own hidden place to go in times of emergency. So people say, oh, they're like this pacifist, whatever country. They're as well prepared for war as any country out there. Imagine that being kind of the thing. Everyone has their own shelters. Now, 1963 and 64, I forget what they said, whether it's 63, 64, height of the Cold War, right? We had Cuban Missile Crisis. The whole world is on nuclear alert, knowing that this kind of stuff could happen. And you could tell it kind of makes sense with the context there. They wanted to make that a policy.
Over 300,000 shelters were carved into the picturesque landscape, with both space and supplies to protect the entire Swiss population for extended periods of time. These were maintained during the Cold War as fallout shelters should a general nuclear exchange consume Europe. In recent years, many of these measures have been decommissioned, given the stability of Western Europe, with many of the bunkers repurposed as museums, hotels, and even cheese aging facilities. Though if needed, they can be recommissioned back to their original original purpose.
Sounds like
and
a
the
nice
mandate of new homes with built-in shelters has, for the most part, been relaxed. There are enough bunkers and fallout shelters to house the entire Swiss population should a catastrophe strike.
I didn't know that they had that kind of 1-to-1 ratio. That's something I did not know.
In addition to the natural and man-made defenses, the Swiss population itself would prove a challenge to any invader. In spite of not participating in a foreign war in centuries, the nation maintains a mandatory conscription. All able-bodied Swiss men are required to perform military service upon turning 18, though conscientious objectors can opt for civil service. Women are not conscripted, though they can join the military if they choose. In order to ensure rapid deployment of forces, those in the army keep their service rifles with them at home. They can even buy the weapons after their service for a modest fee. To keep their skills sharp, target shooting is a popular pastime with gun ranges located throughout the country. This means that an invader, once they overcome the dangerous terrain, explosive infrastructure, and hidden bunkers, will have to contend with a nation in arms that treats target shooting as a pastime.
Yep. So the Swiss, I was just looking it up here, are in the top 20 still of firearms per capita. So U.S., of course, is double anybody. But yeah, the little country of Switzerland is still in that top 20. All right, what do we got? The
Swiss didn't always have a peaceful reputation. Starting in the 15th century, Swiss pikemen revolutionized warfare in Europe, and Swiss mercenaries were highly sought after. Monarchs around the continent would pay high prices to maintain Swiss regiments. Sorry about this. Where was I? Oh yeah.
Ad time?
So this tradition continues today as the Papal Swiss Guard, which is considered the smallest professional army in the world. Don't let the uniforms fool you. They aren't just for show.
I think it's ad time.
I know one of the reasons I get so many spam texts and calls is because big companies can't keep our data safe.
Our personal information is all over the web. I know that my info is out there because I get so many spam calls, texts, emails, and it's driving me crazy. And I swear it's getting worse. The thing is, though, it's not our fault that all that info is out there. For example, Ticketmaster was hacked and the information of 560 million people was put out onto the dark web. This includes full names, addresses, email addresses, phone numbers, and credit card data. And what is Ticketmaster doing about it? Nothing. All of these businesses happily collect our data and do nothing to protect it. This is why I started using today's sponsor, Aura. Aura alerts me if my information has come out in a breach or has been leaked out onto the dark web. It gives me fast, frauded alerts to let me know if anyone's trying to use that information to access my credit cards or my bank accounts. And it removes my information from data broker sites, so I get less spam. I also get things like transaction monitoring, a VPN, antivirus, a password manager, parental controls, and identity theft insurance. I get all of this in one app at one affordable price. I'm not going to leave myself open to breaches anymore. So join me in getting Aura for yourself. Go to aura.com/Mr. Terry and you're going to get your first 2 weeks free. Or click the link down in the description. All right, back to the video.
Russia. Incidentally, invading Russia is...
how many times has this, failed? So we got history just to go back on this.
Not a particularly difficult task, at least on paper. Though the landmass of Russia is full of difficult terrain features, such as swamps, dense forests, and arid deserts, the borders of Russian territory are not guarded by these natural boundaries. To the west, the European plain, a stretch of land from the Pyrenees to the Urals, consists of the largest stretch of mountain-free land in Europe. Much of this land was covered in dense forests, though much of these have been cleared for agriculture and human development.
Lebensraum, if you know what I mean.
The Asiatic steppe likewise stretches as a clear open path from eastern China to Romania. There are some boundaries in these regions, such as rivers, highlands, and other difficult terrain, though nothing as substantial as the Alps or other large mountain ranges.
Russian bear.
Any invader could simply walk into Russia's heartland. And this is exactly why Russia has proven so difficult to control. In the words of German Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the vastness of Russia devours us. Over 1/8 of the landmass of the planet is Russian territory.
It always seems like that's one of the things that gets overestimated. You know, let's say you're Napoleon or Hitler, right? You feel like you rule these large states, these large countries. And even after you may take over a couple, you feel like, okay, like we know how to run and how to invade large areas. But then it's like they totally underestimate Russia. It's as big as the rest of Europe combined. I'm just talking about like west of the Urals. I'm not talking about the Asian side there. And then you get further away from your supplies. We've seen repeatedly the Russians will use scorched earth policy. They will destroy their own stuff before they let you have it. That's what they've done repeatedly. And then of course you got the climate stuff that everyone underestimates. And I don't know if it's just one of these things where if you're Napoleon or Hitler, you're like, hey, we have winters. It gets cold in Germany. It gets cold in France. Okay, but you haven't experienced Russian cold. There's a big difference. The Western European climate is very, very moderate as compared to many other places in the world, like Russia.
Because of this, any invader can walk into Russia, and they'll continue to walk and walk and walk with seemingly no end. Logistics networks, the heart of any military campaign, will be stretched to the breaking point as supply caravans would have to traverse endless open spaces. Living off the land would become difficult, as Russian forces have historically utilized scorched earth tactics to deny the invaders resupply. Though they cannot fall back indefinitely, as was stated in Joseph Stalin's infamous Order Number 227.
And it makes it way harder when you have like some maniac like Stalin who will absolutely destroy all that stuff to spite you, even put his people in harm's way for defense.
Vast expanses do give Russia a tremendous amount of leeway when planning defenses of their homeland. The weather conditions found in Russia are also renowned for helping to stop invaders. Though summers can be scorching, problems for invading armies begin in autumn. Heavy rains will turn the land into quagmires, sinking vehicles and men alike.
A lot of that, the soil will never dry out. It doesn't dry out. It'll be like permafrosted. So you bring your tanks in, which are so heavy, there's moisture in that ground you just can't get rid of, and you get stuck. And some of these leaders, tried to do that later. So like, people say like invade earlier, you know what I mean? Like invade in the spring, because you obviously don't want to get cut in winter. You can't do that. Not if you're using heavy machinery like this. You have to basically start in like the summer when it's the driest it can possibly be, if you're going to bring in this stuff. So that's why even in modern day, it should be nearly impossible to do one of these.
Slowing rapid advances to a crawl. It was the winters, however, that have gained a legendary reputation.
All this stuff slows you down, then you got winter.
And heavy snowfall can blanket the ground, grinding the pace of invaders to a halt. Exposed skin becomes susceptible to frostbite, with hypothermia becoming a rampant issue among the soldiers. And in more modern times, vehicles would fail to operate in such frigid temperatures. Logistics systems already strained by the incredible distances would snap, and invaders would have no choice but to try and withdraw. How then did the Mongols manage to defeat Russia and conquer its territory? The Mongol heartland, located on the Asian steppe, has similar conditions to Russia, so the freezing winters were not unusual. More importantly, however, they had no real logistics system to rely on. Each Mongol warrior was a mounted cavalryman with multiple remounts available. They could move rapidly, their horses living off the grasslands, and the Mongols themselves would live off the land, even subsisting on blood from their own horses when necessary. Russia at this time was also not a unified nation, but rather a collection of rival principalities, and were unable or unwilling to offer a united front against a common enemy.
Sure. And the Mongols didn't rule over that directly like they did in some places. Tributary state. They just basically, it's like a bully tax. They said, all right, pay us money and we'll leave you guys alone, so to speak. But they always make sure that most of those leaders were basically puppets of the Mongols anyways. I consider it like a bullying fee. Paying off your bully, give your lunch money, you know what I mean?
Once in power, after sacking several cities and massacring the citizens, the Mongols ruled over the Russian lands through a system of tribute.
The Golden Horde.
Rulers would be left in place under Mongol control and would have to pay tribute to their overlords. This system lasted for 2 centuries until 1480. The Russians, led by Ivan III, were able to overthrow the so-called Mongol Golden Horde. Great Britain.
Kind of the founder of Russia almost that way. I was looking up because I was looking at those statistics specifically with Napoleon. So Napoleon, famously lost so many soldiers going into Russia. And the numbers is about over 500,000 men were led into Russia. And only about 30,000 ended up surviving. Now, there's multiple reasons for that. But one of those is, a couple of those is the distance, of course, like coming back was very hard for them to get those supplies. It was scorched earth, so they couldn't get supplies the further they went in there. And then, the conditions of the winter also added to that. So about only 30,000 of that 600,000 ended up coming back. And I also saw here that only of those 30,000, only about 1,000 of them were able to be healthy enough to basically maintain their military service. Because the ones that came back, they looked like Holocaust victims. They were so skinny and emaciated and had so many problems physically and probably mentally that they couldn't even be of service to the military anymore. So we all know that's one of the big oofs in history, but that catastrophic. All right, the British, yeah. I mean, you can go back to the Romans. The Romans did it, but we all know that that Britain is a very different place than when the Romans invaded it. Well, Vikings too.
While the rest of Europe has seen armies march across the continent in countless wars over the centuries, Great Britain has not seen a major invasion from a foreign power in almost 1,000 years. There have been no shortage of conflicts, from civil wars to raids to foreign-based coups, but not since the Norman invasion of 1066 has a foreign army successfully landed on and taken over the country, apart from the Glorious Revolution of 1688, when William of Orange had widespread support for his invasion and faced very little opposition. So this is a notable exception. The reason for this is as significant as it is obvious. Britain is surrounded by water, specifically the English Channel to the south, the North Sea to the east, and the Irish and Celtic Seas to the west. The distances in these waterways are not vast. In fact, at their narrowest, the Strait of Dover, the distance separating Dover from the French port of Calais is about 20 miles, close enough to see on a clear day.
There are people that swim that. It's crazy, but there are people that swim that. Look up the records of people that have swam across the English Channel. However, though, those seas can be very, very choppy, though.
Though not insurmountable, like a moat protecting a castle, invaders have no choice but to overcome this obstacle. Any attempt to land on and control the British Isles relies on one key factor more than any other:
Another place Germany
naval
can
superiority.
succeed.
In times past, when a successful invasion was launched, the invaders had a clear advantage in ships and were able to control the waves between Britain and the rest of Europe. This was the case with the Romans, the Saxons, Norse, and Normans, who faced little opposition on the waves. It would not be enough to simply land on Britain's shores, however. Should an army land, they could easily be cut off and destroyed should they lose control over the tenuous lines of communication connecting them to the mainland. This concept has been the mainstay of England, and later Great Britain's national defense. Even with a navy opposing them, many have tried to invade the British Isles. In 1588, the Spanish and their famed Armada launched about 130 ships against the English.
They had a guy for that.
After being harassed by the English fleet, the Spanish panicked when they were attacked by fire ships, scattering in the confusion and becoming easy targets, suffering severe casualties. During the Napoleonic era, Napoleon...
that was a big turning point in history. The Spanish Empire was the power of the seas. At that time, they had controlled the Atlantic and the trade, the coming in and out of the Americas, stuff going to Asia, stuff going to Europe there. So when piracy was kind of at its height there, and that kind of doomed it. It definitely cut off those Spanish colonies, as the Spanish Navy couldn't dominate those waters anymore. It kind of starts that path to independence eventually for all those once Spanish colonies.
Assembled a large army with transports and naval escorts to make the crossing of the English Channel, planning on conquest. These plans were dashed when on October 21st, 1805, the Royal Navy, under command of Admiral Horatio Nelson, smashed the combined French and Spanish fleet at the Battle of Trafalgar. With this defeat, any hopes Napoleon had of conquering Britain were permanently dashed. In the 20th century, control over the seas would not be enough. Air superiority was also a must for any successful invasion attempt. After conquering large portions of continental Europe, Nazi Germany drew up plans for a potential invasion of Britain.
See what they're saying? You can't even invade, like in modern day, you can't invade a place across water today without establishing aerial superiority. That's what doomed the Germans. They just could not get enough an advantage in the air with the Luftwaffe versus the Royal Air Force to be able to safely be able to do amphibious invasions, which is so difficult. You have to control the skyline. I mean, look at the efforts of what it took to do D-Day, and that was after a lot of fighting in the air to be able to do that. And even then, of course, it was very difficult. But also, the Germans had a huge coastline that they had to defend and an eastern front, which is so much harder to defend than anything the British would have to do.
This would not be as simple as making the crossing with a few wooden boats to overthrow the ruling elite, as had been the case in 1066. Instead, plans were made to land 260,000 troops across the south of England, using hundreds of barges and boats. As a prelude, the Germans launched a concentrated effort to destroy the RAF, while the invasion flotilla assembled. Though they inflicted heavy losses, the Luftwaffe was unable to destroy the RAF, lacking air superiority and facing the still formidable Royal Navy, as well as ever-strengthening coastal defenses. The invasion, dubbed Operation Sea Lion, was postponed indefinitely. This was the last major threat of a direct invasion of Great Britain. While not impossible, the complexities of modern warfare require total control over air and sea before any possible invasion can be considered.
So it's even harder now. Hey, pick that guy up.
A lot of people have tried to swim in the English Channel, including an 11-year-old. It's no easy feat, however. There are treacherous currents, brutal weather conditions, and the occasional jellyfish to make things difficult.
I forget what the record is.
For those determined to prove themselves, the risks are worth it.
Over a day, I think.
You know what? I'm taking the Channel next time. Afghanistan.
I want to do the Channel. Oh, okay, Afghanistan. This would definitely go on a list if I made a deeper list than what I did there. We're going to have failure by a bunch of people. Going back to the Greeks, this is where they're going to start to get held up here and lost control there. Fast forward, you're going to get the British struggle here. The Russians are going to struggle here. It's going to doom the Soviet Union when they try to invade and take over in the 80s. Then, of course, as recently, the United States failed there. Anyway.
Afghanistan has earned a reputation as the graveyard
Geography
of
is a huge part of this.
For centuries, many world powers have tried to exert their will on this landlocked Central Asian nation, with at best mixed results. While actually invading the country is not impossible and has been done numerous times throughout history, actually controlling it afterwards is an entirely different matter. Earlier on in history, the area that is now Afghanistan was already causing issues for invaders, such as Alexander the Great, whose advance to the east was slowed down considerably by the tribes in the region.
I mean, they eventually make it through and cross the Hindu Kush into the Indus Valley, where they meet up with the Mauryan Empire and their, war elephants and stuff like that. But it definitely got bogged down for a long time in Afghanistan there.
After the collapse of the Maurya Empire of India, Afghanistan's population increased, and it would soon gain a reputation as a land difficult for outsiders to control. One of the first major incursions into Afghanistan would be by Islamic armies in the 7th century AD, and these would fail miserably, representing one of the first major setbacks for the meteoric rise of Islam. The Mongols, on their way to conquering the largest land empire in history, subdued the region, often slaughtering entire populations to achieve this. The region would then be contested by the Mughals and the Safavids.
The Mughal Empire came from there. They were out of the Kabul region. Babur, the first Mughal emperor, that's where they started, which they came out of. They were also descendants of the Mongols, like everybody was, and actually descendants after that from Tamerlane. But yeah, they actually started there and then moved into India, where of course they're going to rule for centuries, starting in the 1500s.
Powers would face numerous revolts, the Mughals able to control major urban areas and essentially bribing tribal chieftains to keep the peace. And the Safavids' demise was closely associated with an Afghan uprising. In later centuries, a similar pattern emerged. The British Empire fought 3 separate wars in Afghanistan, which resulted in one of the worst defeats a European nation suffered at the hands of an indigenous force in the 19th century. In the 20th century, the Soviet Union invaded the nation and were ground down with an unrelenting guerrilla war.
Yeah, that lasted like almost the whole 80s for them. The Soviet Union was trying to prop up a communist Soviet-backed leader, and they rose up against him. So the Afghanis.
And a few decades later, in response to the 9/11 terrorist attacks, the United States became embroiled in a 2 decades-long conflict, which failed to oust the ruling Taliban from power.
Not to go too long into that, but there is a connection there. The United States supported the people that were fighting against the Russians in the 1980s simply because they were not communists. And among those people were jihadists. All right, this is the time of the Islamic revival of Asia, where Islam was being used as a unifying factor to fight against Western imperialism. A lot of radicalized people come in there across from even the Middle East, come in there and are going to fight and form what's called the Mujahideen or freedom fighters, whatever. And the United States supported them. And then in a twist of irony, those same groups, after the war in Afghanistan is over, will maintain their organization and look to fight in other Islamic lands that they feel Western imperialism was happening. And that then brought in the United States as an enemy. So the United States ended up, financing, helped train those same groups that fought the Soviet Union, and those same people, say Osama bin Laden, for example, who was one of them, are going to then turn that to the United States afterwards.
There are numerous reasons why Afghanistan is so difficult to conquer. Foremost is the terrain. The region is highly mountainous, making operations difficult at best. Furthermore, these mountains are riddled with countless cave complexes, which can harbor enemy fighters. These labyrinthine structures would have to be cleared or collapsed one at a time. A virtually impossible task, even with modern technology. Because of the mountainous terrain, the rural settlements tend to be insular and have formed a complex web of relationships among themselves that outsiders have difficulty navigating. For example, there are 14 recognized ethnic groups in Afghanistan.
This is one of the biggest problems that imperialists have found in places in the world, is they expect everybody to be more homogenous, meaning like culturally similar, than they actually are. Some of these imperial nations have a lot of homogeneity in their country. They've unified their cultures. So when they go up and show up to another country, they're like, hey, everybody's like all the same, right? And they completely misunderstand them. And it ends up, like in these cases in Afghanistan, coming back to hurt them.
And these themselves are divided into numerous smaller subgroups and tribes. If an invader tried to appeal to one clan, they may alienate another, compounding the difficulties already inherent in invading the country. Many of these clans will fight among each other, and as a result, many villages, especially in the northern and western portions of the country, are defended with structures called qalas, which translates to fortress or fortified place, which are usually made from mud brick or stone. Most invaders did manage to control the major urban areas such as Kabul and Kandahar, but in order to control the majority of the country, they will be forced to contend with isolated and heavily fortified villages spread across inhospitable mountainous terrain with limited infrastructure such as roads or rail networks, to face a formidable force of inhabitants who can withdraw to the countless caves.
Oh my gosh, do you guys know what they're talking about here? So when the United States left Afghanistan, there was the Taliban, and they were taking over some of the, these urban areas for the first time because they had been driven out of the urban areas. And there was these videos of them going to like amusement park, and these dudes are like driving around in the, like they were doing the bumper cars and stuff like that because they hadn't experienced that stuff for a long time.
Systems to continue the fight later. For many invaders, this is not worth the effort, and many have learned the hard way why Afghanistan is called the Graveyard of Empires.
Yep. That's one of the most badass names, I feel like, that are out there. So anyway, now, though, there is some economic interest in Afghanistan. I think it's cobalt. Is that what I think? There's a lot of mining operations, a lot of mining opportunities in Afghanistan anyways. And that makes them economically viable, especially when you're going to more like a lot of the stuff that they're mining out there is going to be used for batteries, for, like electric cars and those types of things. So it's still economically relevant. So I don't think, even though with all these failures that it looks like they're listing here on the board, it's probably not going to be the end for outside interests in Afghanistan.
Okay, so the whole Graveyard of Empires thing might be a bit overstated. There are a whole host of factors as to why...
The thing is, though, those were mighty empires. Mughals, Safavids, Soviets, British, Americans, some of the greatest empires and most powerful empires that have ever existed.
Nation rises and falls, and something as simple as the invasion of Afghanistan is not the only reason. It's ironic, though, that any military campaign in that Central Asian nation is almost always doomed to failure.
Yeah.
So there you have it. Any nation can be invaded, and war is anything but predictable. But there are some nations on the planet whose geography, population, or other circumstances makes them virtually impossible to invade.
Sure.
And planning an operation within their borders will cause more than their share of headaches.
Final thoughts. All right, so I don't disagree that any of those countries are among the hardest to defend. In fact, that's a very, very simple list, I think, to make as your top 5 or so were there. But what else do you guys think are other countries that, you know, not necessarily have to be as hard as these countries are to invade, but are going to be significantly harder than the average country? Let's get a discussion going down below. Look at my comment and reply to it, and we'll see y'all next time.